Next, we have a presentation from one of our sponsors. Actually, we are very fortunate in being able to put on this program with the help of KBA, Indo Polygraph, who is the distributor for KBA, Epson, who you just heard from, and from Sakata Inks, who are a formidable ink manufacturer in the packaging area, particularly, although now they have come into the newspaper industry also. Mr. Prashant is a technical person from Sakata Inks, and I will insist that he speaks only technically about some of the issues in flexible packaging and the curves there, and very briefly, if you don't mind, Mr. Prashant, okay? And I will yank you off the stage if you go on too long.
So, good afternoon, everybody. My name is R.S. Prasad. I am from Sakata Inks. So, we have to basically now come to the color standardization aspect. So, color, basically what we had been, understanding before this presentation, our objective and from the discussion that we had, how to standardize the color. So, color consistency also is one of the aspect. Basically, color never changes. Color changes if the input, any of the input gets changed. That's why we see differences into the color. Now, coming to the technical aspect, what is the color? So, color is basically the wavelength of light in between this 400 to 700 nanometer, which is visible to human eye. So, if you pass this white light to the prism, you see this gamut of the color, which is in between 400 to 700 nanometers. Now, this is the total color gamut. In this color gamut, this is the visible light, which is represented through this RGB. Now, we have seen this. This is basically divided into RGB just for our understanding purpose. There can be billion of colors in between this, which will be represented by a specific wavelength of the light between 400 to 700 nanometer. But just for the sake of our understanding, we have divided this 400 to 700 nanometer of the wavelength in RGB. Red is 600 to 700, G is in between 400 to 500, 500 to 600, and blue is in between 400 to 500. So this is what is for the theoretical explanation and understanding of the color. Now, that's why we say that this gamut is the RGB, which we see through our light. But when we want to, transform this entire color gamut onto the substrate, we are left with only this CMYK. And this is basically because of the subtractive theory that we understand, and Mr. Steve has also explained why we do not use RGB to print our substrate, because here the wavelength available is very high, and so while representing or transferring this complete color wavelength onto the substrate, we will have a dirty image. So just to refine those dirty image, we have refined the wavelength of the light in between this CMY, and that's why this color gamut is very less, and this is what is getting represented or printed onto the substrate. So when this printing comes into the play, we are left with this CMYK, which is coming through the subtractive theory. Now what happens? What we see is basically whatever is reflected from the, in RGB, the light or energy of the light is intermixing with each other. So here, When it comes to subtractive, it means whatever light is incident onto the object is able to absorb some of the wavelength and it is able to reflect some of the wavelength. So whatever wavelength of the color is reflected, that is coming to your eyes and then your brain senses that this is this particular color. Now this is nothing but how separation takes place, everybody must be knowing. So how we get yellow, how we get magenta, how we get cyan and how we get this black. This is through the color separation. What Mr. Steve has already shown through this spectrodensitometer, this is the basics of all the entire, color theory, which comes into the printing industry. So, when the light is incident on the object, it reflects some of the lights. So, whatever is reflected, entire digital analysis of color is based on emission spectrum of the object. Whatever is the reflected wavelength of the light, your instrument measures that wavelength in terms of LAB. LAB is nothing, L is lightness axis, whether the color is lighter or darker. A is red-green axis, A positive is red, A negative is green, B is yellow and blue. So if B positive, it is yellower and B negative, it is bluer. So whatever is reflected from the ink, from the print, that is analyzed in terms of this reflection curve or remission spectrum, and this is through equation analyzed or quantified in terms of LAB, and that is what comes as a numerical value of the color. Numerical value of color. So, like perception cannot be explained. Somebody will say, I want redder, I want greener, I want bluer. But if you are able to transform that into numerical value, you will be able to communicate those colors. And this is what we are discussing here, how to standardize this color. Standardization will only happen if you are able to see the numbers. If you have been able to quantify your color in terms of number at the time of designing, then you will expect that after printing also or after lamination of the substrate also, my color values would be like this. This is what is the objective. Now, from the design to get the final output, there are many processes. So color will not change. If the process will change, then color will change. So there is a delta always. That's what somebody had been discussing of LSD, light standard dark. So that's why to accommodate the deviation of processes, we are coming to certain, certain approval norms that the color will be approved if it is lying between this LSD. Now, we do not have right now any standard which defines that the delta between standard to dark and standard to light should be this much. I have never come across any delta. It is only on the basis of the approval of the brand managers or the customers that my acceptance will be within this LSD. So that LSD comes into play. Brand and its reproduction. This is what precisely I had been talking. So all the brand managers' expectation is to have closest possible match with the digital graphic. So you design the color on this laptop or into the digital form, which is RGB. Your printing will happen in CMYK, which is subtractive color theory. So from digital, you want to get the closest possible match into this CMYK, subtractive theory. However, as soon as it has to be printed, subtractive theory comes into reproduction, and the final graphic depends on ink and printing process and parameters. That's why everything comes into the picture. So this is flexible, rotogravure printing methodology. If you see, now let us say we have standardized the color. Even the ink supplier has been able to give the right LAB that you had been expecting, and you have approved during the designing or approval of the brand. So the same ink has been supplied, but what happens during printing, shade approval at various locations by same or different representative from the brand. Like let us say we have to print Coca-Cola. Now this Coca-Cola has to be printed at 6-7 different locations. Now the approval takes place not only on the basis of LAB value, but on the basis of the perception of the representative who has gone there to approve the shade. He thinks that, okay, this is close to my standard, and he approves, and the printer keeps that as a standard. So he keeps on printing on the basis of the approved shade by the brand manager. It keeps on changing. That's why your final output from the market, you can see that it will keep on changing. Then printing process, if it is gravure or flexo, there will be color shift if the process of the printing changes. Cylinder engraving, your ink is standardized, but during printing, this ink will come to this if the chrome of the cylinder keep on wearing out during process of the printing. So the color will change from here to here. Printing parameters matters a lot. Speed, Dr. Blade, impression pressure, viscosity of ink, everything has to be standardized to get the standard color. Substrate and its gloss, somebody had been talking. I will give you a small example. Ink is same. We are printing Pepsi, we are printing, one job is there into Dubai, Almarai job, Almarai water. Now if you see here, if you print this Pepsi, you have to give OP varnish to get the gloss level. But you see the Almarai print sample, there is no OP varnish. And the gloss is better than Pepsi. Why? When we analyzed, we found that the substrate which is used here, perlized BOPP, is having a gloss level of about 60 only. Whereas the perlized BOPP which is used at Dubai is having a gloss level of 100. So the gloss is more without even OP varnish, and the color become very glossy. So that's how the substrate also comes into the play. If you are laminating some ink with metallized film, the color will change. Somebody had been talking regarding reverse metallization. It will change because of the effect of the metal. So the color will change. And finally, it is ink and color shade standardization. You have standardized the shade, but whether the ink which is to be used for the printing is standardized or not, that is also to be done. So you must be knowing all this, that ink is a combination of pigments, resin, additive, and solvent. So every ingredient has to be standardized to get the final output. Now, not only this, if brand manager thinks that this shade is very good for me, it looks very good, but the shade has to be, there is a limitation. If the application demand is there, then you will be compelled to change the color shade, because the availability will not be there for that particular color shade as per the application demand. Now, if you have to go for a retort packaging, the normal magenta, the normal yellow that you have approved is not suitable for that. So you need to have the option which is suitable for retort packaging grade or boil in bag application. So you need to select only those pigment which is going to be a stand by this application requirement. You have to have this light fastness. Now somebody want to get the color fade, in 6 months. So for that you need to select that particular type of pigment. So there also there will be a limitation of the color. So while making the brand, you need to consider all those aspects also. Opaque or transparent, light fastness, all this. We at Sakata Inks strongly adhere to various regulatory compliances Now, if it is a food packaging, not all pigments are suitable for that. You need to have, fulfill the regulatory compliances to select the pigment which is not bleeding from the laminate and not contaminating the food products. So those are the limitations. You need to comply to this regulatory map. Migration is very important. You need to select as per 10/2011 EC what all pigments are there into the positive list of Swiss ordinance. So all those applications has to be behind your mind while selecting the color for your brand. And then after keeping everything, how the color shade has to be standardized while printing. This comes into the picture. You have taken care of each and every aspect. Even then, at the time of printing, the color keep on changing. So, there you have to have this ink management system. Now, this ink management system can be automatic also, like ink dispensing modules are there nowadays, or you have to have certain manual ink management system also in place, wherein you have to give to the printer the same ink which the printer has standardized for his job. So how to give the same ink so that there is no deviation into the color time and again whenever the printer is going to print the same particular job. So for that, what happens, like spot colors, there are many spot colors. No, these keep on changing. Sometimes you have taken, let us say, certain yellow, certain magenta, and the ratio was, let us say, 80-20 to mix it and make it red. Sometimes you are taking yellow and magenta from different supplier, which is not matching to that particular ink. So then the shade will change. What is cyan? Like Mr. Steve was saying, what is cyan? Cyan is a pigment. Cyan is an object, particle, which is able to absorb 100% of incident red light. 100% of incident red light. If it is able to absorb, then what will be left? It will be green and blue, which will be green and blue, which will be reflected. And if green and blue wavelength are reflected, then you will be able to perceive it as a cyan. So you have to have that sort of, the capability is not like that. While making cyan pigment, the manufacturer will not be able to ensure that this particle of cyan will be able to absorb 100% red and will be able to reflect green and blue 100%. So that's why sometimes you will find cyan from some manufacturer, like you can say that there are CI number, 15.3, 15.4, beta blue, alpha blue. So some is redder, some is bluer. So all those things comes into this ink management system, wherein you are able to standardize the color shade by standardizing the ink itself. Ink management system ensures delivery of press-ready ink with perfect shade matching at printing viscosity. Viscosity is a major culprit. 2-second increase into the viscosity, your shade will become denser, your shade will become darker. But if the speed is higher of the machine, by this 2-second increase of the viscosity, you will be able to get lighter shade. So it is contradictory. If the speed is higher, it will not, the ink will not be, the cylinder will not be able to transfer all the ink. So you will be able to get the density at lower viscosity. So that's why I am saying that when you want the same shade, you need to have this perfect shade at the printing viscosity. And this printing viscosity data you have to have. That last time when we have printed this particular job, my red has ran at 22-second viscosity, 22-second viscosity. So next time when I am going to print, I will be printing with the same ink at same viscosity. Then only your color will be able to replicate. You will be able to replicate the color. And believe me, it is a chain propagator. If you are able to manage the shade, then into this printing setup, nobody is going to say that why this color is changed. Everybody will be proactively managing his department because he will not be able to blame the ink because ink was standardized. So whatever other inputs are there, the entire operation team will gear up to control their parameters to give you the right shade. All this has to happen.
So you're saying everybody in the supply chain
Yes.
has to have
Yes.
responsibilities.
Surely, these are some of the products from Sakata. So thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you, sir.
We will come back to discuss a few of the issues that are raised in connection with flexible packaging and spectrum curves.
Sure.
Thank you, Mr. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Prashant. Thank you. Yeah, I think we'll break now if the tea and coffee is ready.
I'm going to take a chance to just tell you guys a little bit about what I've done and who I am and what I do. I worked in, I started as a photographer. I worked as a printer for quite a while, about 10 years. I started running a scanner. I worked in pre-press companies. And then I started getting involved with packaging and supporting brand owners. And what I learned very quickly is that printers could do everything the brand owners really wanted, but the brand owners didn't know how to tell them to do what they needed to do. One of the real challenges that we had, and being from a pre-press company, I told the brand, just let me take care of it, you don't need to know anything. One of the problems that's happened in the United States with brand companies is they have let companies like I used to be with take over their brand. And I've watched a lot of brand companies, the departments went from 20 people to 10 people to 5 people, and soon they were gone, and they had a pre-media company running their brand and doing all their work for them. The issue I see with that in some cases, and my company was the same way, we did all the pre-media work for all the proteins that were done in the United States. So any kind of chicken, beef, hamburger, any food product like that, the meat side, my company did it all. Did I actually give my brands the very best they could get because I represented all their companies? It's something to think about. So what I used to do is I started this off probably with Dial and then with Scott's, and Dial was part of Hinkle at the time, or became part of Hinkle. I'd meet with the brand owners and I'd say, well, you know, if we would implement some of this stuff that I'm talking about, and the brand owners looked at me and their eyes glazed over. So I started writing documents for the brand owners, send this out to your supply chain. And some of the protein companies didn't want to do that, so they just said, do whatever this guy says. Well, that wasn't the way to get things done and to get us better as an industry and try and improve globally how we communicate. But I had written these documents saying, when you receive this, send this file to the ink company, send this file to the printer, how to communicate across different platforms. As a pre-press company, I always considered my job as part of the United Nations, and that's the way we taught it in the United States. I knew how to talk to an ink company, I knew how to talk to a paper supplier, I knew how to talk to a brand owner. So the brand owner would say, I want this, I would digitize it for them, I would hand that to the ink company, and I ran around all over the country doing work, putting these procedures together for Kraft, Petco, and I got to tell you my Petco story. It was really one of the coolest things I ever did that made me realize this needed to become an international standard. We went to Petco was a store where we had pet food supplies, leashes, collars, fish supplies, all kinds of animal things, and they were printing all over the world. We went into the store and we measured the kind of variation they had, and they had delta E's of 10, 12. It was pretty much 12 was the average of work being done literally everywhere. We digitized it, put this file into the package we sent to the printer with instructions. We actually had a little process control tool that we built in Real Basic. The printer had to plug in an I1, scan a strip, and if the Brip said print the job, they could print the job. Almost all of them called me and said, it says the color's good, but this thing over here called metameric index failed. And I would tell them, this is 3 o'clock in the morning in the United States. It was like, take the file to the ink guy. And they said, we already have. And it's like, not the ink guy that's standing there by the press or back in the back room, but the ink technician that knows how to formulate the right ink for your job. We did this with this one project. The first one I did was, again, it was Petco that we pushed this procedure all the way through. All the records that we brought back from those printers, didn't know who the printers were, dropped from delta E's of 12 to delta E's of average 3. We had a few 4s overnight. And it was just instantly, by communicating the right information to the right people, got this stuff aligned. We have brand owners that say, I want this color, but they don't tell you exactly, and this is a good example too. I've worked with Coke for a long time. I'm on their list of, if you have a problem, Axel put my name on there, said contact Steve. He doesn't pay me anything, but a lot of printers call me and go, we don't understand. Axel's brand standards that he sends out, the physical chips, are made with paint. And they're made with different pigments than we can do in the printing industry. So when you measure it, you might have the right LAB value, but their products used to be different every place they printed. So we didn't communicate the actual ingredients with the information we needed about ink migration and food safe. We didn't tell that to the printers. And then the brand owners say, I can't get what I want. I don't understand why. So I'm going to hand out some responsibilities today for all you guys. The 20 years that I worked at Virtus, I was allowed to be the packaging representative for ANSI, which is the American National Standards Group. I started working in ISO. I worked with the Ghent Work Group, with the ICC, and I grab all the smart people I can find in a room and give them a project and say, you guys agree on the format and how to put all this together, and let's make a standard out of it. So this presentation we're going to go through really defines that standard and how all these pieces fit together and what your responsibilities are as supply chain partners. If we all come to the table and do the best job we can and prove that what we did was right, it all fits. It really changes what we do as an industry. This is kind of the agenda, but I'm going to, we'll loosely go through it. If you have questions or comments as we're going through, please jump in and ask them. I may tell you we'll get to that in just a second. Packaging work is so much different than commercial work. Commercial work, nobody takes these two books, lays out these 2 pages side by side and says the color's wrong. But in packaging, when stuff's on the shelf, people won't buy that package. What that means for a consumer products company in the United States, if I put a product on the shelf and it doesn't sell, Walmart wants me to pay for that shelf space. And they do that in such a way that if it sits there for a long time, they're going to throw that product away and send me a bill as the consumer products company to pay for that product nobody bought. I'll hit one more quick story as I get into this. The first time I did this for international standards, I worked for Tetra Pak for about 15 years as one of my customers, and they had written this enormous book of, and I don't know if y'all have worked with Tetra Pak, but if it's not in the standard, a printer can't do it. Everything they do in their facilities is all well-defined exactly what it has to be done. And any of their 54 locations only do what's in that book. So I looked at the book, I read through it, I got with my local people, I worked in Mexico, Canada, and the United States, and then I met the guys in Sweden that were writing the book, and I was like, where did y'all come up with all this? And they said, well, it's from ESCO. It's like, well, that's not the standard writing organization. You have an ESCO workflow here. So I sat down with them and rewrote their document, and every place that they said, you shall do this, I put in the ISO standard for that is this, and you shall comply with the ISO standard. Many of the consumer products companies in the world have had to write their own standards because there was never a list of this is what we need to do to be successful. So over the last 15 years and really the last 3 years, we've started a new project at ISO called 16761. Part 1's for commercial print, Part 2's for packaging, of how you shall manage color. One of the big differences in there is in commercial print, LAB's fine. Nobody's going to look at these two books. And you have one from the U.S.? I think I have one from the U.S. Let's see how these two look. I've got the wrong one. Do you have one of these? Can I grab one over here on the table? This was printed in China. Do you have a G7 book? Not too bad. So the Chinese did this one and distribute it, and they're not awful, but we're not going to look at them side by side and go, that one's dirty. But it's glossy, but it's dirty. We don't care. If these were two packages, if you thought the same product was in each one, you'd really have some questions about it. So when you go into a store, and this is really where I want to start this story off. You go into a store for 30 minutes, you see 17,000 products. What do you buy? 60% of what you buy when you go into a store is impulse. 80% of your decisions are actually made in the store. Do I get this brand? Do I get that brand? There's a new private label that got moved up to the shelf. That's where my Quaker Oats used to be, and now Quaker Oats is down on the bottom. We do this stuff, and we do it in less than 2.5 seconds. Our brain looks at these packages and says, I want this one. And you go on and get the next thing on your list. You don't spend a lot of time, but we look at the color, we unconsciously grab the package that looks right, and the yellow package remains on the shelf. I did some work for Sara Lee for a while, and they had this product Kicked Up. It was a gourmet sausage. My wife really liked the sun-dried tomato flavor, but I really like Indian food, so I like the spicy one. I wasn't allowed to bring that home and feed it to my wife, so I always got the one in that color package. When this one reprinted, it printed the wrong color. The brand was taken off the shelf, removed, they killed the product. They had hundreds of thousands of dollars invested in doing this brand, but because it printed the wrong color, it was removed from the market and they did something else. It's so critical to brand owners and the way our brains work. We pick things, we pick sizes on diaper bags by the color that was in there. When that's the wrong color, we get the wrong one. The drinks we get, if it's peach or mango or something else, you grab the wrong one, you're not going to go back to that brand again. You're going to go back to the one with the nicer shrink sleeves on it. So Sara Lee wanted to try and prove this. They took one of their brands, State Fair Corny Dogs. They got 60 employees, and they had the perfect package, and then they had 4 other packages that they set beside it, one of them being a Delta E, a 1.5 off, one of them being a 3 off, one being a 6 off, and one being a 9 off, and they had these people go through and do normal shopping experiences. This data is really, really hard to get. But they were able to put this together, and they showed that at a 1.6 Delta E off, that 56% of the people preferred the good package to the bad package. And we think a Delta E, a 1.5, that's nothing. It's really hard to run a press and stay within that type of tolerance. When you jump up to a 3, it was 70 and 30. That's huge. Now, I do a lot of work for Diageo, and they have Smirnoff. Anybody from Diageo in here? Okay. then I'll stop on that story just a little bit. But what they believe is if their whole presentation is not right, I may grab a bottle of Absolute, and I may never go back to Smirnoff. That could cost that company $2,000 over my lifetime. So it's not just that one purchase and what gets returned, it's losing the trust from a customer. When we jump down to a Delta E6 and a Delta E9, at a Delta E9, 2% of the people bought that package, 98% didn't. And I would question whether that 2% of the group was the colorblind men that were just getting the stuff and throwing it in the package. What we do in packaging is so critical. In the United States, we have 2 different shapes of bottles, 2 different sizes, and 2 different colors. And every wine that we sell is in one of those 6 bottles. People go in, 85% of wine purchases are made based off the label and the packaging. If this color doesn't match that color, if it's not all the same, there's something wrong with that bottle. And we think because the package is wrong, the company didn't care enough about their product, so surely what's inside can't be great either. This was one I found in somewhere in Asia. I sat down and looked at them. They're exactly the same image, but there were no aims put in it. There was no process control in place. These were all sitting side beside each other, and then the other packages of the same product look really good. I wasn't going to buy that. That cotton product over there was yellow. There was just something wrong with it. I wanted the one that was clear and crisp and white and in the better package. We talk about packaging. What is packaging? Is it the can? Or is it really the whole display? And when we talk about this, I've got injection molding. I've got POP type something that was made. We've got plastic that we've done. We take all these components and we stick them together for the buyer's experience. And if this doesn't look right, people are going to walk right past it and go to the next one that's in the stores. From Diageo's standpoint, I have a lot of these. They try and preach this, and I go out and teach it to their supply chain. What's the most important thing here? What? What they would come in and tell you, it's the entire thing. If the signage looks bad, somebody didn't care about the product line. If the whole package, and I was looking in a liquor store here the other day, got real excited because I work for Diageo quite a bit, but I saw this Absolute thing that was made out of wood. It was gorgeous. It was colored in the back. What a great presentation. And all these companies invest in those type of presentations. But if one component of it doesn't work, and again, we are really focused on the corrugated piece. That's our point of purchase stuff. So all of these are laid up, and that should match that, should match that, should match that. I carried this around one time in Asia. That bottle, do you know how many colors are on that bottle? Different colors. 5, 10, more? Triple it? There's 54 different colors in that bottle. So part of it has been printed gravure on the little label on the front. Part of it has been printed offset, cut and stack. The back piece has been printed flexo. We have metal decorating on the top. You've got a sleeve going across the top of it, and then an offset security label on top of it. So literally when I sat there and went through it and counted them all up before I did a presentation in Thailand, it was like, there's 54 colors in here. Now, on the back, the flexo didn't look quite as good as the offset on the front, but the hue angles were aligned. So nobody looks at it and goes, well, some of us do. I take a glass to the grocery store with me, but hardly anybody turns it around and says, oh, well, that's flexo, this is the gravure, this is the offset. If you look at it, it all fits and it all looks right, even though it's 4 different printing processes. Actually, there's 5 because you've got the metal decorating. What Diageo doesn't want to see, and I have the fortune to teach people this, is when people look at the POP work and the corrugated doesn't look the same, that must be the cheap rum. You're not going to buy something that doesn't have the right appearance. This was some stuff that I was involved with. We signed off on it and left, and then the printer just went in and over-impressed everything, and we started getting all these flute lines in there. That wasn't what was approved as the standard. This was one of their projects that just got miserable. It was actually, they had renovated, they changed the brand. And these were never supposed to be in the store side by side, but they shipped them all out before all the other ones were gone. The stores thought it was neat to do them like that, and they didn't sell any of them. It stopped. There's something wrong with those, I don't know which one you pick, but one of them, there's something wrong with that product. I did this product too, and this one really bugs me. People in Texas buy 100 times more Crown Royal than any other place in the world. And we make stuff like this? Are you going to pay $40 a bottle when, as a brand owner, if I don't care about the point of purchase stuff, do I care about what's inside? Now, the U.S. government makes sure that every drop of what's inside those bottles is identical. But that's not what we think in that 2.5 seconds when I grab Crown Royal or I grab some other consumer products company stuff. So I haven't been to many stores here because I've been really busy in the last 10 days. But I looked at what you guys do, and it's fabulous. The Johnnie Walker packaging that you have for India is incredible. But I had to scratch my head and think about it a little bit. These were for sale at the airport when I came into Delhi for $8 a bottle. And it's got a gift wrap thing inside, another box on the outside, another box on this gorgeous, gorgeous packaging on the cheapest whiskey Diageo sells. And then I love Kingfisher. That's the only Indian beer we can have in the United States. I looked up in the front where they had these displays, and it was like, if that ever showed up in a store in the United States. Now, question for you brand owners. I get brand owners together and I take them out to dinner and listen to them talk. And they say every Monday morning they come into their desk, somebody's paying them a lot of money to manage the brand, and they come in and they find all these products that don't match. And the senior vice presidents are just going, why am I paying you? You can't control all this stuff. Well, it's hard to control that supply chain. This is the kind of thing that shows up in the brand owners that I worked with's desk every morning going, we can't have our product looking like that. So, as Mr. Prasad said, for packaging, we have to define the criteria for what we're going to do. How many different things are we going to print in that line? We've got to lay all that out when decisions are made as you build the brand color. This one was being done with folding carton and on cans, and we had some bottles that were being done, so we had injection molding. We took the design stuff from the Landors that made it, the big New York agency. Before we sent this in to have any of the production illustrator artwork done, we developed these brand colors. We took those colors and gave them to the designers. The designers built the files with the correct colors. All of our expectations were aligned up front and then passed through the supply chain. The other things that we've got to look at are supply chains we're efficient as printers if you'll let me do the same job over, the same thing. Let me run the press the same way. Quit changing the ingredients on me. Don't have me have a proof from one company one day, a proof from another company the next day, and these things were all made off fingerprints that don't match each other. So as we talk about standards, I'm going to keep pointing back to the ISO standard data sets. If you'll use those, calibrate your press to those, you run the press the same way all the time. Printers' job's to be consistent, but yet we throw all these variables at them and colors that they can't match because it was made out of a... Anybody here from Danaher? Because it was made out of that Pantone guide. It's a guide of suggested colors. It's not a standard. So, and then we get into the brand owners where you guys find something you really like, you communicated it well, and then it goes to procurement, and procurement goes to the printer and says, but we're not going to pay you to do it. That's really the world we live in, so there has to be a relationship really good between the brand manager, brand owner, and the procurement department. They have to align on what the requirements are and what the supply chain partner's responsibilities are. So as I walk through this, I'm going to talk about the responsibilities for everybody in the supply chain. Quick thing is, this is the worst thing we do in the United States, is the company says you've got to be certified. We send one person off to be certified. Well, what does the third shift do? They do whatever they wanted to. I ran a press for a long time, and as soon as the day shift press operator left, I waited for him to get in his car. I turned the press off. I cleaned it. I set up the ink and water the way I wanted to run it because he really didn't know what he was doing. The problem is we didn't have a standard operating procedure and agree on how to run that machine. So a lot of the programs, like the Color Management Professional Program, the FTA has one for Flexo, a lot of these programs you can get on disk and online. A lot of the CPCs in the United States require continuous training of their employees, and I'm seeing that happen in Mexico a lot right now, to where they're setting up training programs to make sure everybody in the plant can do it. I signed off on that Crown Royal carton, and then I left and the second shift came in and they made it wrong. How do you see color? There's 6 things here that everybody in this room could do that will improve your workflow tomorrow, and it'll cost you so little. 20% of men are colorblind, 5% of women are colorblind. This test can be done online. Put a monitor up, look at it, understand what the variation is. As we get older, as we get a new pair of glasses, all of a sudden we can't see tones that we used to. I have run into many press operators that really should have been using a device and not looking at anything because they could not see color. If you don't take the test, you don't know. And it's not a test that you pass or fail. It's a test that as I get older, I don't see those shades as well as I used to, but I know it. So I ask other people, hey, I can't see that color. Would you look at it for me? It's so critical, and it's free. I have a hard copy of this test that I take around with my clients, and I make them go through it in a view booth, and they learn something about what their perception is. The other thing that's critical is if this light isn't like Mr. Prasad pointed out, if that light is not white, if we have an orange light coming in, everything we see is going to be different. So having the correct lamps in your view booth, they may cost $20, where a inexpensive lamp costs $1.50. But do you want to build your business on that and lose a client because you have the wrong lights in there? So as I teach this, I was working with Del Monte and a printer in the United States, and I went in and I was told what a horrible client it was. They'll hate everything you do. Well, I went in with a spectral radiometer and I measured their view booth. They had the wrong bulbs in it. So I did the best I could by the numbers. I sent it off. The customer complained. Said, well, it could have been more yellow. It was a bunch of vegetables. Okay, do you guys have a view booth? And they're like, well, no, we don't, but this is how we always do it. So I gave them the report from the printer, and I showed them how this worked. They went and bought a view booth. 2 weeks later, Shock called me and asked me to go for another press run at this same printer, and I called them and said, have you put the bulbs in yet? Well, no, but we're going to sometime. I said, I've got to be back tomorrow. I'm having bulbs FedExed in. I'll bring them in with me. You're going to have to pay me when I walk in the door for these bulbs. They could have ordered them for $20 each, yet they paid $600 for overnight shipping. This is such an inexpensive thing to do to put the right lamps in. Here's the expensive piece of low-hanging fruit. If your instruments are not aligned, we have a real problem. We can communicate. I won't work with printers anywhere in the world if they don't have spectrophotometers. One of the things I tell my consumer products companies, go to the ID Alliance G7, if a G7 master printer has a spectrophotometer, or they couldn't have gone through the G7 compliance. Same thing with the UGRA or the FOGRA. You have to have these tools in place. So when I look at Walmart and where they select their suppliers, they start off with the G7 masters list. They'll go over and look at the other two, but that's been their preference, and now that's where they demand their color gets done, is from a G7 master printer. There's a lot of tools that are like Net Profiler, and again, I had one up here that one day Narish will see, and because this is being offered through a company in the US, you can read in every device in your supply chain, go to a website, and see that they all match. You may not have to send them all in on an annual basis. The standard is, and in the standard I'm going to show y'all, you have to send them in according to the manufacturer's requirements. Low-hanging fruit. ISO 13655 defines instrument settings. The standard's D52 for printing. Hershey wants D6510. And it's like, why are you doing this to the printers? You're making it hard, and they're confusing us. My friends at X-Rite were primarily in the business for paints and the textile industry. It's D6510 in that industry. It's D52 in the printing. And they're like, well, most of our business is in that other industry. But they still haven't changed their documentation, and they're telling us, they're confusing us, saying, you should be D6510. All of their posters have that on there. So as a printer and a supply chain partner, we really need to hold our vendors accountable, going, give us the right stuff. The new standard defines M0, M1, M2, and M3. And quickly, M0 were all the old devices. You could have a pulse xenon lamp in here, you could have a daylight lamp, you could have a flashlight lamp. The new standard for M0 is still the same. It could be any light source, but it's so much tighter than it used to be. These are much better devices now than they were prior to 2011. M1 means that you have a daylight light source in here. Excuse me, D50 light source, the same thing that's in those bulbs you buy. ICC profiles, color management, this stuff all works if we're using the right light sources. If we're just doing LAB, we can only define one light source. And I might have had that on an earlier slide, but have y'all seen these in the UGRA scale or the red ones from Rheem? These are fabulous tools. The red ones die in about 2 months. This one will last for a long time, but every time I go into a printer or buy a view booth, I pull it out and look at it. It's critical that our lighting's the same, or we're not going to have a common appearance across packages. A common language for defining color. Now, all of this stuff is defined in this standard I'm going to show you. As humans, we understand LCH. L is how light or dark something is. C is how saturated the color is. And H is what hue angle it is. It's really a pretty easy way of doing it. I want my lamp to work. So yellow is at 90 degrees. Magenta shall be at 357. And cyan shall be at 233. That's the standard for packaging. Y'all ask about different substrates. If I'm on an uncoated substrate on a flexo press with some volume, I'm not going to print as saturated as I would on that cyan if I was on a coated substrate. But from a brand standpoint and a harmonization, if you take that exact same hue and make it a little lighter or darker, our eyes don't see it. We don't look at that and go, there's something wrong with that package. We see that cyan when it goes to the yellow side or the blue side. If you don't engage your ink company, and again, there's a lot of partners in here that converters are paying today. You're paying the ink guy, you're paying a cylinder maker, a plate maker. When we have the wrong hue and gravure, somebody was asking me last night, how do you fix it? Well, you've got to change your engraving, maybe, or you've got to change your ink, or maybe you do both. But if your ink guy and your gravure cylinder engraver can't communicate, you've got a disconnect in your supply chain. So we all have these responsibilities that we've got to do to do this global work consistently. It works. I've done it with many, many brands. And again, I've gotten alignment now between Coke, Pepsi, Anheuser-Busch. Thank you. It's all fitting well. There's some new standards. TR015 from ANSI is the math of how to do G7 calibration. CGATS 21 is a set of 7 data sets of CMYK that go from very small gamut up to very large gamut. This is a digital press, maybe gravure. It's the GMG's pack space that had G7 applied to it. So the appearance of the neutrals, the tones, they're all very, very similar and aligned. My apple's redder down here than it is here. That's the same file that printed all those. I can't make a redder apple on Colset News, but if this was your product and we had to print it in a newspaper, and you guys do more of the improved news here that's a little higher quality, that's acceptable to most brands. I tried to keep everything for my customers. Diageo lives right here. Some of our guys print here, some of them print there. It's okay. We are going to have a little different strength in things on different substrates, but if we align the hues and the neutrals, it fits real well. CXF, color exchange format. Pardon? Yes, sir. Yes, sir. If you and that's what we'll do in the next session. As you calibrate with this near neutral process, you can do this. So we're aligning the hue angles and we're aligning a common grayscale. They do all fit. We do this day in and day out across the world today. Color exchange format, CXF. It's a new ISO standard 17972. It allows me to take these things, digitize it, give it to a designer. When they see it, it's in a palette in Illustrator. They don't know what the spectral data is or anything else. They build the file with it. It's been built with the right inks for that product. When they send it to an inkjet printer, it pulls the CXF data out and makes it work right. When they pass that on to a press, they have a CXF file they give to the ink manufacturer, and the ink manufacturer can make the same color that was defined in the standard. Also gives you a sheet of data, so you know for a dot gain curve, you know all the components for all the supply chain partners. A designer doesn't need to see this, but the ink guy needs that. It's literally everything everybody needs to pass spot colors back and forth. We print these patches. Let me just do the easy stuff. Inside of Illustrator, you bring in the colors. They go into your palette, and then you build the file the same way you would build anything in Illustrator. I trained the guys at PetSmart. They asked me to take I went and showed them all this stuff, just like I'm doing you guys. They called me 2 weeks later and said, well, we're redesigning one of our brands. We've got 1,200 SKUs going to 800 printers. Can you take it over for us? And it's like, I'm just one guy. I can't do that. And they said, well, come teach us how. So I spent 3 days with them. I spent 1 day with their designer, and then a little bit of time with a few of their printers, and they're getting printing they've never had like that before because we're giving the right components to all the right people. We're communicating, and that's what color management's really all about. Can I communicate the right stuff to the right guys? In Illustrator, I build the files with these colors. When I export that out to a PDF, it all comes out in PDF. Adobe has allowed us to write this into the ISO standard for PDFs. I can actually open it up in some tools and change the rotation to where the silver is going to be on the bottom here. PDF today, typical versions, make you do CMYK spot, spot, spot. But inside here, you can actually realign it so the preview is correct in softwares that read it. In proofing solutions, like the one out there, you turn on a button that says, always apply the CXF data, and your spot color issues are gone on your inkjet proofs. It doesn't fix all the metal things and some of the other stuff, but it actually does spectral blending and gets it very close. I can also take that same file and drop it into my ink formulation system. It doesn't matter which ink manufacturer I'm using. If you can get the CXF file in here, it'll give you 15 different recipes. I want the one that lines up with that curve the closest. This was the tool that we did. I guess this one was for Hershey, but we did it also for PetSmart. I'd send this out. This was just a little Excel, real basic program. People would look at it and go, it's a delta E of 1.16. This is great. We did the color perfect. And the ink guys would come yell at us because it failed. Well, why did it fail? Because under cool white fluorescence, it's a delta E of 4. I missed an important thing I told you I'd share. At D50, it's a 0.98, and at D50A aluminum, it's 1.18, but in cool white fluorescence, it's off.
What's A, E, and F11?
F11 is cool white fluorescence. I can't tell you what E is exactly. A is incandescent.
So you need to say that you have to specify
3 different lighting conditions, and that's really the brand owner's job to say these are the 3 conditions that I'm going to look at my product in. When they communicate that, we can pass this out. So where's your product going to be shown? Is it in some of the drugstores all have a common lighting. You can define that lighting in the standard. LABCH, again, is how we define colors, not with Pantone. Pantone's a guide. It was for the guys that created the concept, not for production people. This is an example of how we do work typically at Diageo. Is the designer says, I want this color. We make a family of those to get them as close as we can across the plastic, the craft, the coated, the uncoated, and the metallic. This one I think is really important for you guys. This LSD system does not work. When I take this color and I make it lighter and darker, it's a different color. And somebody asked me, how do you define that? I don't know, it's what you all will consider acceptable. But if you allow this, when they go back to press with it, you're going to let it go inside and out of that, and pretty soon you're going to have one over here and one over there. If you keep, this is the target, that's the defined standard. Keep that number target there that we can communicate with everybody and it fits. When I do the brand standard development, whoever built the master program gives me a Pantone value. If I took that and printed across all these different types, I'd have a mess. So we develop these, we give them to the ink manufacturers, and they give us what we want. As a printer, my job's real easy. This ink has been aligned for my analogs, my volume, my plates, my cylinders. They have to be the partner in this, but if you just tell them the lab values, they really can't give you what they need. The Flexo standard, I just wanted to hit this. This is a standard 12647 Part 6. It was made for packaging. It says the job is to match the customer's requirements. You have to match their expectations. If they give you a file and you know where you print and you can't hit it, you need to talk. Can't do that on this. If they planned it all out and did it correctly, then it works pretty well. It defines hue angles, it requires PDFX, it works off hue angles, and it does have some tolerancing in it. 16761 was the heart of this presentation. It defines requirements for designers, for workflows, for calibration, conformance, and for reporting back to the consumer products company. We saw this slide the other day. This came from the French, but they've shown that by doing accurate pre-flight, that they've been able to save 50% in workflows throughout the rest of the supply chain. By doing process control, a printer has some variation in it. When you do process control and you can understand what's uncontrollable variation, because you're going to have some in your inks, your printing process, your consumables. Once you can identify that and find out what the controllable variables are, you can fix them and your margins go up. You improve your process. I should have had all those already pop up. Standardizing workflows are really the bottom line in making all these pieces fit. Come on, Ellie. There we go. 12647 Part 2. It's a workflow and requirements for everybody in the supply chain. 16761 Part 2. You can get it from Narish. I've sent him a digital copy of it. It'll be with this presentation so you can go through it. It lists, you can be ISO certified, 9000, and we're working on that right now, but you can be compliant via ISO as a designer, a brand owner, a pre-press company, or a converter, or you can just ask your supply chain to be conformant to it. It has test conditions, how you measure it, how you validate it for everybody in the supply chain. So we're doing it for file generation, separations, spot colors, soft proofing, hard copy proofing, viewing, conformance, and certificate of analysis where we do rub test and alcohol test. This is the important one, I think. The brand owners, if they're looking at color, they need to have accurate viewing conditions or they communicate wrong with us. They need to, if they're going to measure and define things, they need to have instruments just like the rest of us do. They have to define the aims and tolerances or none of us have a chance. Both for the CMYK and the spot color and registration. They also need to give us a design guide saying the most important element in this is this, and this is not quite as important, and this is what we want our brand to communicate. Because sometimes there's compromises in printing, but if they'll tell you their design hierarchy, you can make sure that their expectations get met. They're also required to give us all the structural requirements, the die lines, the physical requirements, the ink migration for food. We've got to have all that stuff communicated to us by the brand owners. All of that is in this standard.